What do soul contracts have to do with your capacity for resilience, or your ability to change your coping mechanisms and survival strategies, or heal those trauma wounds? Welcome to this episode of the Biology of Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Spirituality, astrology, soul contracts are not often part of the conversation that we have when we talk about biology, overwhelm, or the body's breaking point that makes a difference between a stress and a trauma response. But that is exactly where we are going today. Now, if this topic is somehow offensive to you, I encourage you to be open and curious about how it might actually play a role and still fit in with your world perspective, culture, or religion. If this is an area that you're already jazzed about, this conversation is going places that will have you taking a deeper level of personal responsibility in your life and healing journey than you may have been called upon to do. Let's dive in. If you've read my book, you know that I have capacity all throughout there. In fact, the whole several chapters that I start off with, they don't use the word specifically yet, but that's what I'm building up to, is this concept of capacity. And what's my capacity right now? What's my capacity today? Because that determines my resilience, that determines my tolerance, that determines my critical line of overwhelm. And more importantly, how can I build my capacity for tomorrow so that I can be a more authentic version of myself tomorrow, so that I can hold more tomorrow and not break and fall apart. So when I use the word capacity, I know what I mean. And for me, it's very cellular. I think of mitochondria, I think of CoQ10 and magnesium and how much energy can I make? But you have a different take on capacity. How do you define capacity, Marie?
The way I have always viewed capacity is our resources for being able to handle everything that life throws at us on an energetic level, on a mental, emotional level, how much we're able to take in and truly survive. Capacity for me is so deeply tied to resilience and how we're able to show up with every day, because as you said, each day requires a different level of capacity and same with different seasons in our life. And I think it's so important to give ourselves the grace and understanding for each season that we're in, and understanding that does fluctuate. But there are so many ways that we can resource more energy to build our capacity and expand it for what we're moving through in the present.
And so where did you learn this? What have you experienced that you were tested in terms of capacity and understanding these different phases that we go through?
I didn't realize how much limitations I had in my own inner capacity and how much trauma that I was really carrying through my life until my son was diagnosed with brain cancer. And I was forced to really do a solid inventory on that, because in that moment, it was very obvious that it wasn't about me. And I had to buckle up and find every ounce of strength within me to help him and to process that very stark change in reality. 1 minute living in this, what felt like a fantasy and illusion now, looking back, to being slapped with a completely different way of life. And so every single day through his cancer journey, and ultimately through his transition and in my grief and needing to show up and still be here for his little sister, really tested my resolve from my own capacity. And I realized in that place that for me, what made the greatest difference and helped me through it all was my faith, my understanding. And I didn't have a strong religious basis at that point. I was raised Catholic, but something always felt a little off to me, like there was something more. Like to explore and understand all different religions and way of life and connecting. And Tristan really helped me with that. So our journey became one of deep reflection, exploration, and adventure to find the ways where we both felt safer moving through what was being asked of us and finding deeper meaning and intention to it.
And through this process, what were discoveries that you made about yourself and contracts that you had that were affecting your ability to move through grief and transition into a new phase? Tell us about some of those discoveries that you made about yourself and what you would call soul contracts.
Whew. There's this little saying that I have inside of me that was birthed along with Tristan's passing and his death. And it was, I had to lose him in order to find me. Because when we have this role and this identity as mother, caregiver, stripped away from us, it really leaves you with this gaping emptiness that makes you truly have to look at yourself and really sit with, who am I when everything is gone? And I know there was so much still that I had, but there was also this deep underlying reality that I was sitting in, with understanding the fragility that if he could be ripped away so quickly, so could everything else. And if everything else is taken away, then who am I after it? Who am I outside of all of that? And so it really sent me on this like deep exploratory journey of figuring out, who is Marie? Who am I outside of the conditioned space? And then it started making me go down a whole rabbit hole of childhood trauma and conditioning and all the things on top of that. And so it really was like this pivotal piece of activation for me that set me on my path to truly coming home to myself. And as much as it is something that I think any parent would want to take away to have their child back, I can sit here today with so much gratitude for that experience, because in a way of losing his physical vessel, I was able to gain my soul in this physical incarnation. And that for me is one of the greatest gifts that he could ever give me.
And I remember when we spoke previously, you mentioned how there were a lot of people who helped you along the way, a lot of people who showed up for you and supported you in the middle of this. And then there was this element where you felt obligated to stay in a certain level of capacity. Tell me about that.
We were so blessed with our community and our family and our friends and the love and the kindness of strangers that showed up during that season. And when you move through that, there was this overwhelming amount of guilt and indebtedness that I felt within me after Tristan had passed, to be able to continue to show up and share and honor and give gratitude back to everybody. And I very quickly realized that in that pressure, I was actually just minimizing my capacity to even cope with every single day. And it took a lot of restructuring at that time for me to understand that I needed to be gentler with myself and in that season. And that when people show up and they give and they support, they do it from just the love in their hearts and not out of a need for exchange in that season. And so I had to remind myself that when I was resourced, that is when I could return everything tenfold from that space. from a more healed space rather than just depletion. And that it would be 10 times more effective.
And so, how do you now define or help other people like me understand soul contracts and how they could be playing a role in my life unknowingly?
Beautiful. I love this question, as soul contracts for me is something that I began to deeply explore after Tristan transitioned, because I wanted to understand, just like everybody does through big pieces of trauma and loss, why did this happen? Why did I have to go through this? And then there's, with tying a mother's guilt, you feel all this karmic impact that just is, oh my gosh, what if I did this differently? If I showed up this different, what did I do in my life to deserve this? And it just felt like I did it to him. And so I needed to find a piece of understanding. So I started actually diving into a book that came forward to me from an astrologer that was helping me at the time, and a dear friend. And it's beautiful how the universe brings people together. And Lotta gave me this book called Journey of the Souls by Michael Newton. And it's these case studies over and over of hypnosis and people going in between this state and after they transition, and everybody's saying the same thing. They're having the same experiences. They're saying how beautiful it is, how much light there is, how much love there is, and how much better it feels. And then moving through and seeing all of these past life memories with other people and remembering them in this current incarnation. And I was like, okay, then maybe there's got to be a story behind us further. And so I started looking into it and exploring that and understanding that this is something that Tristan and I agreed to before we came here. And every single person put into our path, if we're open to it and we're in the energetic alignment to receive it and not decline it, that every single person that comes forward is here to teach us something, to support us in something, maybe to activate something within us that was laid dormant. And I find now, the more and more I embrace soul contracts and understanding of being able to really honor the soul's journey in the human experience rather than taking everything personally as a human, and understanding that maybe somebody's just moving through an expression right now, but that's not who they are as a soul. And so always giving that space, which also gives more capacity for understanding. And really embracing that now has led me to this beautiful part in my journey where now everyone that comes in is in such divine synchronicity that everyone feels like such a member of this soul family. And it's magical. And it was just like, as soon as I sat down and met with you, I was like, oh, we've done this before, and you can feel it. And so it's so beautiful and important, I think, to not discount that from our lives. And it just adds so much more joy and nourishment and honestly safety to know that we are that supported and that everything is lined up to help us actually survive and thrive in our journey and not fall victim to it.
And as I think back on the language that I use, so much of it is around this idea that we just adapt, that we're in an environment, we're in a situation, we adapt to that environment in order to survive. And then we continue living as we have adapted, even though our environment has changed, even though the situation is different, even though we have more resources, even though we're an adult, we're no longer a child. There's so many ways in which we can continue living as if. And where can soul contracts be a part of that picture of living as if?
I think when we look at living as if, we get frozen in this identity that we've built up from the people in our lives and our soul contracts. So take our parents, for example, right? They shape so much of our lives and who we are. And it's a lot of self-imposed beliefs and narratives that they can place. And I think it's so important to understand that they came into our lives to create a very specific identity for us to also break free from. And so we can move on living as if we are this version of ourselves that we know to be true until we have our lives shaken completely upside down through another soul contract that comes in and an activation and agreement, just like Tristan was for me. And then move through all of these other identities and soul contracts that can come in and can be birthed in these instances through all of the people that come forward to help you heal. Until you finally come to this space where you're no longer living as if you're living embodied. And that's the biggest difference. It's wild to me when I look back to how I was living before Tristan and now. It is two completely different people that I would think that it was like a full death and rebirth. I can't even recognize her anymore. So one of the things that I hate hearing that really like gets to me, and I'm like, that's not true, is when people say people don't change. Yes, they do. Because circumstances change you. So you can. Every single person has the ability to change, to grow, to heal, to evolve. That's what we're here for. That is the ultimate contract of our soul when we even come to this earth. Is how can we become a more evolved, conscious version of ourselves? And every single person that comes into our lives is here to activate that remembrance and to help us on our soul's correction and our journey. It's the lessons that they give us. That's truly the greatest gift of every person that comes in, whether they're positive or negative. In fact, they're actually all just neutral. They're here for you. They're good for you. You get to lean in and make them whatever you want based on what energy you stack and which energy you choose to move into. You can either choose the energy of negativity and the victim, or we can choose the energy of understanding, of the hero's journey, the purpose, and have this certainty that everything is happening for us, not to us. And then you really need the integrative care from there, because it is one thing coming to that place of realization and having that anchored in. And trust me, I've been through the whole journey. You need the integrative care, because it's one thing for the soul and the mind and the heart to be locked in and feel that peace and understanding. And then there's a whole other ball game when it comes to the will the body respond accordingly. And that's what I love so much about your work.
I remember going through that phase myself where I had understanding and I could see how messed up I actually was. And then I'm like, but what do I do about it? This is awful. This is an awful moment to see it and not yet have the tools to change it.
It's so overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming. When I see the messages that, oh, it's all about understanding. No, it's not. It's not about understanding. It's about taking action. It's about knowing where to move and take some agency. And as I reflect on what you're saying, it reminds me of the 5 agreements that I give my people from the very beginning when they sign up for a foundational journey with me, which is where they all start. I give them 5 agreements and I say, these are our agreements. If you can agree to these, you're welcome here. If not, this is not going to be a good place for you. You're not going to feel comfortable here, because our 3rd agreement is personal responsibility. And I like to add the radical personal responsibility for me and myself to remind myself that life does not happen to me. Life is happening for me, and it's my responsibility to lean into that, when I feel like, once again, I'm a victim, life is happening to me, that's my moment to pause and say, I'm choosing this for some reason. And that's not always a popular opinion, because trauma is that experience of, no, I am powerless. And so you're switching the script on us, and you're saying, actually, there's an element of, my soul chose this because it would in some way help activate the change and the growth in me that I came here to do. And it creates a very empowered state, very opposite than the powerless state of trauma.
And that power is what, for me, builds capacity. Because then no matter what the human part of me was going through and enduring, and how much of that little victim voice wanted to keep creeping in and just being like, just feel sorry for yourself, stay in bed, feel sorry for yourself, don't worry, she'll be fine. And instead, I chose the opposite. Every single day after Tristan had passed, I woke up knowing that I have an opportunity here to teach my daughter about life and death from a completely different frame that was ever given to me. So did I want to sit in bed and just cry and feel like, woe is me, and allow myself to really just like grieve and process? Yes, I did. But the reality of my situation is I had a 3-year-old daughter who was missing her brother, who was completely confused and was looking to me for safety. And so I had to dig deep and understand that, okay, her soul also chose this part of the journey. Tristan did not come here to make us suffer. I never wanted him to be a victim, because to me, he was the ultimate hero, always will be. And so I was like, how can I truly honor him and his soul? And I can do that by truly honoring myself and hers in our journey and the purpose of why we even chose this. And it is one of the most triggering things for me to say to any of my clients when they're complaining about, oh, their parent or even their abusers, anything. And I'm like, you actually chose and agreed to this together before you came. Imagine yourself sitting at a boardroom table with every single soul involved in your entire incarnation and your team behind you, and every single one putting all of these puzzle pieces together, creating this master plan and script of who's going to play what role for who's going to teach what to who's going to take negative karma away from someone else to help clear. And we're all doing this to elevate not just individually, but our collective consciousness. We are coming to a place where we are right now on this planet where this is absolutely necessary and needed. So yes, all of this was planned before we came. We were literally willing participants, knowing that our soul at the end of the day, no matter what we're enduring and going through, no matter what Bobby over there did to Sally, it doesn't matter, because it's for the highest, greatest good of everyone involved. And when there is pressure, when there is darkness, that is when we can actually see and receive the most light. And so we have to take every opportunity that comes to see what is the light available in this situation. And that is how you find the motivation to keep going, because the human loves to show up and be like, no, I'm running the show. Sit down, soul. Enough of your remembrance. I want to stay in my ego and in my victim right now. And so it's this constant battle back and forth. It's not an easy journey in a game, but this is where we need such an integrative approach that feels like good for you and the way you move through your journey and the way I move through the journey. Lord Almighty, the way my husband moves through his journey, every single one of us are different. And that is one thing that I have learned very openly, is how different every single person responds to trauma. And understanding the different states of what the body goes through. I think the thing I love about it the most is that it takes the shame away. And you're just understanding, oh, like all I'm actually seeking this entire time is safety. This is just how it's expressing and showing up. And then you peel that back and understand this is what the body is doing. This is what the ego is doing. Okay, and they're all doing this for what purpose towards the soul's journey? And this is how my complicated brain works. I'm always connecting all the dots and searching for meaning and understanding so that I can then bring in all of the tools and resources and beautiful soul contracts in my life to help me move past it and move through it so that I can evolve. My biggest goal is that one day when I cross that finish line, that I can jump up and down and be like, did that. No one can take that away from me. You signed me up for it, crushed it. Thank you. Moving on. Don't send me back. Like, unless you need me to do some big work. And that's what I'm here for now. And obviously, like, I wouldn't have gone through everything that I did to make me suffer. And that was my existence. Every single one of us, I truly believe, that is put through the ringer in this incarnation is here for such a bigger purpose. Every single person that is squeezed and put through darkness and pain has a purpose to bring more light through to this earth, because they really do ripple out and affect and change everyone around them.
I think of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And that's essentially what he was wanting to share with people as well, is that there's no in suffering by suffering itself. Suffering is not the end goal of these experiences, awful experiences that we go through. It's the deeper work that we get called to as a result of those experiences. And I have noticed that one of the main things that will hold a person back in their suffering, not allowing them to move into the deeper and bigger work that they're actually being called to, is their stories. And that is why agreement number 4, I talked about 5 agreements. Agreement number 3 is personal responsibility. Agreement number 4 is we don't share stories, not even to ourselves. We get out of the stories, because the stories, for me, were what kept me in that state of, oh, this is awful. Oh, this is happening to me and I'm a victim and I'm suffering and there's no end to this. And there's no deeper work and meaning that I am being called to as a result of this refining me to be able to step into that deeper work. And so without explaining why, I tell people when they're starting with me, we don't share stories. We don't talk about our stories. We don't sit around and talk about all the things that happened to us or the things that didn't happen for us that should have happened for us, because it's not helpful to other people, but it's also not helpful to us. And that's a big shift for a lot of people, Marie, because that's what they're used to. And that's what they think that trauma therapy is. Let me talk about all these stories because that's my way of processing through them. But what I'm hearing you say is no, actually, that when we look at it through this lens of, I agreed to do that, I chose that, and that person was in my life to help me move through that, to understand that, to bring that up in the open for me, then it allows me to take the shame out of it, like you said. And I don't have that regret and sadness and all those freeze kinds of feelings that come up when I think about certain people in my life that, that didn't turn out the way that I wanted to. That relationship didn't go the way that I wanted to. And now I can look back without that shame, knowing that's what we had agreed to do for each other. It wasn't intended to be anything more than what it was. And the freedom, the relief, the space that just that helps create.
Because then you're not taking it so personal and making it mean anything about you and who you are or your worth, really,
But
at the
Marie,
end
of
of the
course it's about
day.
me. What are you talking about? Of course, everything's about me.
That's the ego. And
That's
this
the
is where
ego.
I love to explain to people that maybe Johnny was deeply in love with you, but the creator told Johnny, you can't be in love with her because you would set her on a completely different path. But you can love her in another lifetime, maybe, or maybe you already have, and that's why it feels so real and present. And it should be like that today, is because we have remembrance to maybe what was at one point in time. The thing is that we have to look at things from such a bigger picture and lens. When we get very tunnel visioned into this like little experience that we're having, and we make it all about ourselves and get into the eye of the storm of the tornado of it, it's so hard to see the meaning outside of it. Just like when we're in our suffering, the suffering is just the vehicle to the greater understanding if we're willing to open our eyes and see it. This is where my work with Dr. Bryce was so helpful, because I didn't understand that even through everything that I was going through. I was so proud of myself for being able to see the big picture. It is one of my greatest soul gifts, because when somebody comes to me with a story, I can slash that in 2 seconds with you, because I can give you an entire rewrite of what is in truth from the soul's perspective. And then it completely collapses and shatters the ego. And then you have no victimship to sit in. Now you are just in absolute authority and empowerment to have to move forward from that space. And now I've just given you all this capacity because you're no longer carrying all this baggage that didn't even exist. You made it up, truly. The stories that we make when we look at things in our experiences, when we affirm it, I love that you do that, because the more people affirm a certain story and belief, guess what the universe then does? Now, what we're manifesting and attracting is proof of that story. They have to literally validate the reality that you've created up here, because that's what you're seeing on. What you focus on grows. Where your attention flows, like, you got to be careful. You have to be careful, because you will see that story be affirmed to you over and over again. So one of the things that I like to do is actually do full story rewrites that gives them in a seat of full empowerment. I'm like, if you're hell bent on this story, let's rewrite this, because this is the only way you're going to be able to move forward. And then they realize how quickly everything starts shifting and changing around them to validate that new story. And wow, that's a lot more positive. Look at all these beautiful things now coming in and affirming this truth. And so I like to look at it like where you can either be stuck in deep as in the actress that is playing this role, or we can give ourselves enough agency to step outside of the situation enough and be in the seat of the director and observe everything that is unfolding and direct from there. And when we sit in the seat of the director in our own lives, rather than being lost in the emotions of the actress, it is wild how much more capacity and agency we have over our life and what unfolds.
Yeah, this is very
I could go
similar
on
to
about
the
this.
art narrative process that I lead people through that was so transformational for Miguel when I had him, that it allowed this huge, massive shift within a few days when we had been working on everything else and we had planted a great foundation, but hadn't been able to get all the way across the finish line. And this is what did it, this exact same process. And so that's why I lead others through this art narrative process as well, because it's very different when you are the actor or the actress, and when you step out and are the director, and you're just watching the scenes unfold. And so, how would someone be able to step back in that director role and even be able to see the soul contracts that we have with someone? for someone who comes into my life or someone who was in my life and I've struggled to find a sense of peace with that relationship and how it ended, how would I be able to identify the soul contract that I had with them? Or is that not even necessary?
I think it's always necessary, because that's when we have that, we can truly release it. So this is what we're carrying so much unnecessary things forward that we don't need to. So if we can actually really wrap up the contract, the experience, take the lessons, leave the rest, then yeah, I think it's really important, because that's what shapes us. That's where our wisdom sits. That's what helps us move on. It's like a video game where you move on to the next level, right? Like you have to finish and wrap things up. And so I think this is a really great way to do that, where a lot of people miss this step. Now, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. One, when you're in a deep state of trauma and lost in the position of the actress or actor, I think it's so important to have somebody who's on the outside to help with an open perspective, for one. You can find this information by working with somebody who can tap in and tune in to sacred soul contracts, like myself. So I do that through the Akashic records, looking into the quantum field, and I can pull that information forward to help you give the energy and remind you of what is present here to learn. We can also find this information in our astrology charts. You'd be so surprised how much information actually sits. It's so written that I have this one little saying, you can't make this up. Because when you actually start looking for these answers and you see how blatantly they're written, you're like, oh my goodness, we've had a blueprint for this all along. What have I been doing? This makes it so much easier, because now, instead of being like lost in the experience, we're in a power seat again. And we can know, like, this is part of the soul correction that I'm here to work on. So if somebody came up to you and was triggering this whole experience, and you realized the soul correction that you were moving through in here was that you always gave your power away to another person. You always looked for validation outside of yourself instead of going within. Okay, then if I know that, then how can I preserve my agency and catch myself, pause, not react? And how can I pause and go within every opportunity that presents itself, rather than just reacting from this old conditioned space? How can I truly build this sacred trust within myself to trust my own voice? My goodness, how many times in order to make a decision do we outsource that outside of us, as if that person truly knows what's best for us over ourselves? But that's how majority of people are functioning today, because they have such a disconnect from their soul's essence. So do I think it's important to really look at our soul contracts that we have and have that understanding? Absolutely. And I think it's important to do so, because in that, we don't only just take away the shame from ourselves, but we stop shaming and judging others. And that, for me, is the most important thing, because evil speech, judgment, and like this negative talk towards other people has such a karmic imprint to ourselves that we don't realize. The sages say that if we knew everything that was coming out of our mouth, the implications of it, we'd sew our mouths shut, because it's that bad. So if we can go back to the person that abused us or played that role for us and really harmed us, and find understanding for what triggered them to be that person, to even have that expression in this lifetime, to find that understanding. Is this just a role that they were playing? But look at all of the things that happened to them leading up to it, to even put them in that position. All of those contracts existed before it, just for them to be able to do that to you now. So when you think about how many moving pieces there are to this chessboard, you're like, oh my gosh. Okay, so like, maybe this one thing isn't such a big thing after all. Maybe I can find meaning in it and be like, okay, what is this cultivating within me and why? How can I transmute this? That for me is where, and it was funny, I was channeling one day and meditating on the name of my business, and it came through in love and alchemy. And I was like, what the heck is that? I was like, that is, first of all, it's a mouthful. And I was like talking with my team, and I called Tristan, my son, my CEO, because there's nothing in my business that gets done now without him. And they just showed me how the recipe for alchemy of the soul, to really transmute, to really move through this from the victim to the hero and go on to help heal other people. The ingredient at the core of everything is love. What is love? Love is being able to be like, and I'm talking real love, not the kind of love we were taught, but like the unconditional love. The type of love that you know comes directly from where we come from. It has no judgment. It has endless understanding and compassion and grace. So, yes, how can we look at every single person that hurt us and find it in ourselves to love them anyway? And I had to first practice that in the hardest way. And it's funny, I went through hypnotherapy after Tristan passed, thinking I was going in to heal parts of my trauma from his journey. And then I had full memory and rediscovery of sexual abuse as a child that I was like, oh, I wasn't sure that was there. But that came up. I was like, okay, let's deal with that. And I had to get to a space where forgiving that was easier for me. The big one that I had to tackle was the doctor that overdosed my son when I gave her multiple chances to correct and avoid that. And that for me was the hardest, because for 3 years we did everything in our power to stabilize and try to cure his cancer. And his last MRI at that overdose showed us that for the first time, we were receiving cell death to an incurable cancer. And it was like he wanted us to have the gift of knowing that you did this. But at the same time, I was like, oh my God, we did all of that. And then this happened. And it felt so wrong. And it felt so cruel. And it was like, it's just a simple thing of her rushing out to get to her cottage. And it was just pure ego, because as a mother, what do you know? I'm the doctor. And so it took a lot for me to come to that space. But I knew I would never be okay. And I would never heal this part of myself. And I'd be carrying this forward forever if I couldn't look at her and love her for the role that she played, regardless of how it resulted and what it did, because there was a purpose and a meaning to it. And so when I was able to look at her as a vehicle for something bigger than us, I was able to release it. And then guess what happened to my capacity? Oh, now I have more capacity for life. And so now I'm able to sit on a board of the children's hospice that is being built and cultivated because of what happened. And so when you look at all of these things, that yes, sometimes difficult things have to happen for really good things to come in. But in order for that to happen, we have to go through the alchemy of the process. We have to alchemize the energy that is present. We have to purify it, because we can either poison the well or we can clean it. And both are an option. That's the free will choice of the soul. That's what makes this journey so hard, is because we have that agency while we're here. And so the only way that we can actually truly get that added support even come through, we have to open ourselves up to it. I had to come to a point in time in my journey after that where I was on the floor crying, bawling my eyes out. And I said, I'm done. I give this to you. I give it to you. I called in all the supports, because it was far beyond my capacity at that time. And something just instantly shifted. And I remember being in the laundry room is where I always hid from my daughter to cry, but she's not going to come in there. And I remember being on the floor of my laundry room on my knees and just crying and begging God to take away the pain and bring back the love. Because that was what was so devastating, is that I felt like this whole memory and experience and journey with Tristan, all I could feel was pain. But I'm like, where was all the love that I felt before he died? And so in order to get that back, I had to keep giving it to him in a way that, because it was all I knew how to do at that time. But I noticed a shift afterwards where I stopped carrying things I didn't need to, and it created this space for healing to come in. And then more love was able to come in, and more anchored in more to the love of the experience of Tristan and everyone involved, and just tried to focus on as much gratitude and forgiveness and love and compassion and understanding as I could. And through that is how I was able to increase my energetic capacity, my emotional capacity. And I did so much beautiful work. And it's so funny how God humbles you. Because it wasn't until I sat down with Dr. Bryce for vision therapy, and he was like, you're visually a mess. Your brain has suffered so much trauma and inflammation. We need to fix you. And I was like, but I've done so much of the work. Until I went there and I cried so hard that day because I realized, I was like, oh my God, I'm a hot mess express right now. And I was so happy for vision performance training with him, because it actually helped regulate my nervous system in such a beautiful way that it was like all of the work that I was doing all these years, Aimie, it finally embodied and integrated. I instantly lost 10 pounds, just fell off afterwards. I felt like a completely new version of myself because of all this new functioning that was available to me, because my brain finally realized I wasn't still in the traumatic state. Even though my soul, my mind was like, you're out, my body was like, no, you're still there. You're still there. And so for me, we need all of the methods. I'm a true believer we need a massive integrative approach, and there's no one size fits all. We need different things at different seasons. We need different people for different reasons, and every single one carries as much merit as the other. And the one thing I learned from that whole experience is how important integrative care is in medicine, and how little room we have at the table for ego and separation and competition.
100%. And for reference, for those here listening, Dr. Bryce Applebaum is a mutual friend of both of ours. He was the one who actually introduced us. And I am having him on the podcast and talking about this vision performance that Marie has referenced. Now, Marie, I know that you
so excited
right?
for that conversation.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Yeah, both of us have such high respect for him, not only his work, but him as a person, as a soul, as and the character and integrity that he shows up with. I know that you've been reading my book, and given your work, I am very curious to see, how is it landing for you? What are pieces that you can see we're saying the same thing, just from a different lens and even maybe different language? What has it been like for you to read the biology of trauma?
Such an awakening journey, one where like every page I turn, I'm like, where was this at the beginning? And I'm so glad it exists today. It is so powerful. Like I messaged my husband. I was like, you need to read this next because we all process so differently. But the one thing that it showed me where there is absolutely no separation is the way the energetic body completely perfectly mirrors the physical body and how it responds to trauma. And so when I go and I work in somebody's quantum field, I can see the exact patterns of how the energy has gotten stuck, or how it's in a freeze state, or it's just fully escaped and I'm out of here. This whole human incarnation thing sucks. Count me out. And so what I've seen in a lot of people when we move through huge amount of trauma, the physical body will be standing here. and the soul will be just slightly disconnected outside of it. And so it's so important to do this work, because what it does is that it minimizes and takes away the separation. And this is where we get embodiment. And this is where it's wild, our life force energy, how much it's meant to come on. But the physical body responds so, like, just so perfectly in tandem that I'm like, oh, you need both. Like, you need to be doing both for it to truly land. Do I think you can still get there without it? Yeah, but that's going to take you a lot more time and effort. And who has time to waste? And why make it harder for us? So I think it is very eye-opening, to say the very least, moving through the book. And there's so many places where I'm like, every single time I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about that. Oh my goodness, we need to know. That it's like, where do I even begin? And this is like the overwhelm. And it's so funny because moving through the book this weekend, there was, I can't remember exactly what chapter, but you speak about moving from overwhelm into trauma, and that very fine line where it's all it takes is this little, and I was in such a good place. And it's so funny. I love how they utilize things perfectly right before something big is coming up. And I see this very often. I don't know if you do in your practice, but sometimes they'll make us go through a certain situation just before a patient does, or a client, so that we know actually how to hold that humble space for them. And so this weekend, it was a very vulnerable space that came up between my husband and myself. And there is a reason why they statistically say a lot of marriages don't survive after child loss. And this weekend was one of those reminders of how difficult it is, because both of us showed up with a trigger that needed to come to the surface to be worked with and transmuted. And I saw how differently he was responding and showing up, and what his cellular responses are versus mine. And having your words to understand that was beyond powerful and helpful, because it gave us the tools to find mutual understanding and respect in that moment, rather than catalyzing it instead. But it also made me realize how incredibly quickly I went into exhaustion right after. And I was like, oh, okay. It's been a while, but I reached my threshold. And now I got to work on my capacity again. And I think that is one of the beautiful parts of your work, is that it lines up with mine perfectly from this one perspective. And that is that we are all a piece of art, always unfolding in creation. There is never like a finished picture here. There's no final destination of I am completely healed. No, you are not. You wouldn't be breathing in here today if you were. You would have checked out, because your soul would have been done its journey. So I think we can get as close as possible. We can definitely make strides in movement, but then how can we also take that and give ourselves the grace of time and remove that pressure of having to always be at a particular pace every single day? And moving through the book, I am so excited to talk to you after this episode, because now I'm like, oh, I'm so focused on the body now. I got to work on my biology next.
And I hope you are ready to do deeper work on the body and biology as well. It's fitting all the pieces together, and that is what I am here to help you do. I will have links in the show notes for all the things for connecting with Marie Damasio of In Love and Alchemy, to the book Biology of Trauma, how the body experiences and holds fear, pain, and overwhelm, and how to heal. And I would love and really look forward to your comments and questions on this episode. Given the topic, given that it's a different conversation than usual, really look forward to your comments and questions. I'm Dr. Aimie. Until next episode, lots of love.